here?
It's a long story.
This wild story begins at the docks in Maine, where a yacht's lifeboat vanishes. By the time the owner notices, it's already cutting across the waves toward a quiet island. On that island, Nathalie and her new husband George are meant to be celebrating their honeymoon. But not everything is perfect. Nathalie is half George's age and once struggled with addiction. He was the judge who lightened her sentence before marrying her. Watching over the beach house is Lance, Nathalie's childhood friend, a man who knows the island and knows her in ways George never will. And heading toward them in that stolen boat is Kent, Nathalie's ex. When George and Lance set off on an overnight fishing trip, Nathalie is left alone.
For me?
Oh, well, it's for the both of you, to brighten your day.
You haven't brought me flowers for years.
Are you sure you'll be all right?
I'll be fine.
And remember, no drinking and no sedatives.
Have fun. Behave yourselves.
Bye.
Being apart from George for the first time leaves Nathalie restless. She tries to distract herself, but her thoughts keep circling back. She considers taking her pills, yet after staring at one in her hand, she changes her mind and flushes it away, deciding she can get through the day without chemical backup. She goes to the beach for a swim. The cold water helps, and she starts to feel lighter. But while she is gone, Kent shows up at the house.
It's again.
Oh, God, Kent! What are you doing here?
Did you believe I borrowed a friend's boat?
Since when do you have any friends? You'll never change, Kent Draper.
Hollow lilies and dark chocolates, right?
Fantastic.
I thought you'd like them.
Out at sea, George brags about how solid his marriage to Nathalie is. He says it's because he's older, wiser, and far more stable than any of her past boyfriends. Lance politely reminds him that Nathalie is like a sister to him. If she's happy, that's all that matters. He recalls how George used to be jealous of Kent. George admits it and laughs about how he once poured lighter fluid on Kent, warning him to leave Nathalie alone. Not exactly the healthiest way to win someone's heart, but okay, George. At the beach house, old habits creep in. Kent reveals he had to steal a boat just to reach the island because Nathalie never came to pick him up, despite sending her a postcard about his visit.
Are you sure you didn't get it?
No, I swear I didn't get any postcards.
Got a picture of the big bad wolf on the front?
You know, you really shouldn't be here. I'll get you something to put on.
While Nathalie is in the bathroom, Kent helps himself to a bottle of vodka from George's collection. Nathalie is disappointed. She knows this pattern too well. Kent reveals that Evelyn, his wife, left him because of his drinking, so he decided to drink even more. He tries to tempt her into joining him for old time's sake, but Nathalie knows George wouldn't like it and declines. Kent is unimpressed and tells her he liked her better when she had a mind of her own. On the boat, George is still trying to prove himself, bragging about quitting alcohol and about how he helped Nathalie quit her addictions, including the sleeping pills she once relied on. In his mind, this means she's fully recovered and doesn't need them anymore. But what sounds like discipline to him sounds reckless to Lance, who knows those pills aren't optional. Meanwhile, at the beach house, Nathalie grows anxious as Kent makes himself more at home, so she takes one of her pills.
Remember this?
Yeah, I remember.
When's the last time you danced?
With you, probably.
Definitely. Come here.
I don't think this is such a good idea.
Oh my God, I missed you so much.
Kent! I can't do this.
Nathalie wakes up on the sofa, disoriented. She looks out the window and sees George's boat approaching the shore. Nathalie drags the dining table and rug aside, revealing a hidden cellar door. She hides Kent's body inside. He barely fits and the lid doesn't close completely. She straightens the room, resetting every detail to erase the event from the night before. George returns, beaming with pride over the massive fish he caught. Nathalie forces a smile, telling him she's heading for a swim. But instead, she takes a boat far out to sea, where she tosses Kent's clothes into the water, trying to sink the evidence along with her fear. Meanwhile, George stumbles on the empty vodka bottle and grows suspicious. Lance pokes around the kitchen and notices George's odd habit of storing food and supplies in the strangest containers. When Nathalie returns, George confronts her about the empty bottle. Nathalie claims it's spilled, but George points to the open cap.
I need to talk to you.
going on here?
I have to get some air.
I'll talk to her. If you ever need to get away, my door's always open for you.
Don't worry about me. I'm okay.
George finds the flowers and chocolates Kent left for Nathalie, along with his wristwatch. These aren't the kind of surprises you expect in a happy marriage, so he presses her for answers. Nathalie finally admits that Kent showed up while George was out fishing and that he's now in the cellar.
I can only think that it was his heart.
His heart.
You know, he had a bad heart.
He's naked!
And that's how I found him. I swear nothing happened. I thought you would be jealous. I was afraid you'd pull up again. I panicked. I thought that you would be jealous.
We'll put him in the storage shed for now.
Nathalie and George drag Kent's body to the tool shed, trying to figure out what to do next. Kent's clothes are missing, and worse, his neck snapped when George stomped down on the cellar door. Those details won't look good in court. They try to recover the clothes. Nathalie leads George to the spot where she swears she dumped them. George goes into the water to search, and Nathalie does the same, but they don't find the clothes. They decide to widen the search area, but their boat stalls, forcing them to paddle back to shore to fix it. George sends Nathalie to the shed for methanol. She searches and finds nothing. Then George remembers. He'd kept the methanol in a vodka bottle. If Kent drank from that bottle, it wasn't just booze. It was poison. With his weak heart, that could explain his death. But Nathalie swears Kent never went to the shed, and the couple can't figure out how he managed to get hold of it. Nathalie can only suggest that maybe it happened after she took her pills and blacked out. Either way, George knows what this looks like. He's a respected judge, and Nathalie has a record as an addict. The justice system won't be kind to either of them for the death of her ex, so they decide to handle it themselves. Their plan is brutal in its simplicity. Weigh Kent down with an old stove and sink him in the ocean. As they carry the stove to the boat, Lance appears on the path.
What you doing?
We're just getting rid of a little junk.
But you don't think you're gonna get rid of me that easily, do you? Come on, let me give you a hand.
Thanks.
Oh no, I'm not gonna leave you holding the stove, George.
I don't think it's deep enough.
You could lose a courthouse down there.
Have a closer look. Hey!
While Nathalie distracts Lance in the water, George struggles with Kent's body. He ties it to the stove and tries to heave it into the sea. But Lance notices. He starts swimming back. Nathalie does her best, splashing, flirting, anything to stall him. But Lance isn't fooled. He heads straight for the boat. George hides the body just in time. Lance arrives and, without a clue, tosses the stove into the water himself. The pressure is getting to them. George and Nathalie argue, their honeymoon cracking under the weight of everything. Frustrated, George grabs a knife. Then an idea hits him, and with it, the old urge. He pours a drink, as if liquid courage could make this nightmare easier. Meanwhile, Nathalie walks to Lance's cabin for comfort. But on the porch, she freezes. Kent's clothes are hanging out to dry.
Look like you saw a ghost or something.
I never imagined you wearing something like this.
The tide brought it in, and I just figured I'd dress up for dinner. Want to come in and say hi to Mo? So what was it all about today?
What all about?
Us. Under the water.
That was just old times.
I don't remember that part. So what do you think?
I'd like to take that suit and clean it for you.
Nathalie thinks she's finally found a way out of this nightmare. She rushes off, eager to share the news with George. She finds him drunk by the little outbuilding. In front of him are fresh concrete steps. Steps that now hide Kent's dismembered body beneath the cement. To George, this is the perfect solution. If the body is never found, there's no crime to answer for. But Nathalie hears something else in his words. Maybe he knew Kent was coming. Maybe this was planned all along. The thought terrifies her. She runs for the boat, desperate to escape. But George notices the missing boat key and catches her before she can get away. Back at the house, George confronts her about the sleeping pills he's just found. Nathalie admits she's been taking them in secret. To her surprise, George lets her take one, but only to settle her nerves for the night. Then he makes it clear he can't risk her running to the police. With that, he locks her in the cellar. Meanwhile, Lance spends the night carving a wooden sculpture of Nathalie. It's almost sweet if it weren't so badly timed. Nathalie spots some tools and manages to break free. She runs straight to the boat and sets off, but George isn't far behind. He catches up, climbing onto her boat. Nathalie fights back, knocking him into the water and grabbing a gun. For a second, it seems she finally has the upper hand, but George recovers quicker than she expects and knocks her out cold.
You know, I've been thinking about this suit and the dinghy. I thought you might run it past the police. I'd sure appreciate it if you dropped this off.
What the hell?
On his way to the police, Lance notices a shotgun shell rolling across the floor of the boat. That's when he realizes his shotgun is missing. Back at the house, George restrains Nathalie, then leaves to work out how to cover his tracks. But Nathalie, desperate and resourceful, manages to get to the kitchen and grab a knife. George returns, now dressed sharply, as if preparing for court instead of a crime. He lifts Nathalie and carries her toward the place he intends to kill her, but he spots Lance returning and aborts. When Lance arrives, George says Nathalie tried to take her own life with the shotgun after swallowing too many pills, and that they'll be leaving soon to get her professional help. Once Lance leaves, George sets out to make his story match reality. He crushes Nathalie's pills and stirs them into her drinking water, but Nathalie isn't done fighting. With the knife, she cuts herself free, runs to Lance, and tells him everything.
Ken sent this postcard. It was a picture of the big bad wolf, but I didn't see it, okay? George hid it. He knew that Ken was gonna drink it, and now he's dead. He cut him up and cemented him in the steps. Go and see for yourself. He's there in the steps.
No, I will.
No, promise me.
I promise. I'm gonna get this whole thing straightened out. You don't need to do that.
No, of course not.
Lance, you promised me.
Let's go take a look at the steps. Nat said that you cemented a body in there.
You've got to be kidding.
Nathalie isn't someone who stays down for long. She fights back and frees herself again. She spots Kent's missing postcard, proof that Lance knew more than he ever admitted. Nathalie runs to the beach and tries to stop George from turning on Lance. The struggle turns violent, and Lance is shot. For a moment, it looks like George has the upper hand, but Lance rallies with one last surge of strength, knocking George out cold.
How does that feel?
Much better. Don't go right now.
Lance, don't.
You know, when we dumped the stove, I could have done some things, but George was around. You understand? People who love from a distance without getting any love returned. Sometimes that love can turn hard and brittle. The biggest love can turn to hate. The postcard, I forgot to give it to you. I didn't read it. I didn't know Kent was coming.
Nat, you think I killed him, don't you?
Nathalie is now convinced that Lance knew Kent was coming all along and that he switched the alcohol to kill him. She panics and runs to George, believing he's the innocent one. Lance chases after her, swearing he's innocent. He's desperate for her to believe him. But then George appears. He pulls the trigger, and Lance goes down. George grabs Nathalie once again and drags her back to Lance's cottage. He calmly helps himself to a drink from Lance's stash. Without hesitation, he cements Nathalie's legs into a heavy metal container, planning to roll her straight into the sea. Before he does, George lays out the story he'll feed the authorities. He'll say Lance killed Kent out of jealousy and buried him in the steps while they were out boating. When they came back, George supposedly took a nap, giving Lance the chance to trap Nathalie in the container. George, of course, will paint himself as the hero, claiming he tried to save her but had no choice but to shoot Lance.
Drinking.
George doesn't realize it, but the liquor he's been drinking was actually the ethanol they thought Kent had consumed. Nathalie puts the pieces together. It wasn't poison that killed Kent. He really did die of a heart attack. At that moment, George's legs grow weak, his vision blurs, and he loses his footing, plunging into the water. Nathalie seizes the chance. She uses a metal rod to pull the shotgun closer, then shoots the water can weighing down the table beside her. It starts leaking, just enough for a chainsaw to slide her way. She hangs it from a hook above, switches it on, and tries to cut through her ropes. But the saw swings wildly, nearly slicing her instead. The chainsaw eventually cuts through the shelter's support beam, and the entire structure gives way. George is impaled by a falling spire, while the rope binding Nathalie is severed. She slides into the sea, her legs still trapped in cement. With her arms bound tight, she can't swim to the surface. A beach patrol boat arrives. The officer, searching for the missing lifeboat, spots it nearby. As he hauls it in, Nathalie clings to a rope at the boat's side and manages to surface just long enough to cry for help. The officer tries to rescue her, but her legs are still cemented. He slips, and his foot slams the accelerator. The boat speeds forward, crashes into the rocks, and explodes in a fireball. Somehow, the officer pulls Nathalie from the water and frees her legs. Later, as they leave the island on her boat, he asks for a drink. Nathalie points him to the cooler under the seat. What she doesn't realize is that George had slipped an overdose of her medication into that very bottle, and the officer is about to take a dangerous sip.